attend and contribute to this webinar titled Escalating Violations Against Palestinian Prisoners, the Role of Incitement and Global Inaction. This crucial webinar will discuss the increasing violation against Palestinian prisoners fueled by incitement campaigns led by Israeli ministers Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. These campaigns have exacerbated systematic abuse, medical neglect, and the suffering of Palestinian detainees. The discussion will also explore the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the international communities, including the Red Cross's failure to uphold their responsibilities to protect Palestinian prisoners and ensure accountability for these violations. First of all, let me remind you of today's key points of discussion that include escalating violations against Palestinian prisoners, abuse, neglect, and deteriorating conditions in Israeli prisons. 2, incitement campaigns by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, how their rhetoric fuels violations and targets Palestinian detainees. Global responsibility and inaction, the role of the international community, including the Red Cross, in failing to protect Palestinian prisoners. The ongoing genocide in Gaza, linking the border context of Israeli policies to the plight of Palestinian prisoners. And international law and accountability, ICC developments and legal responsibility of Israeli leaders for crimes against humanity. And lastly, pathways to justice, strategies to hold Israel accountable, amplify Palestinian voices, and secure justice for prisoners through advocacy and legal mechanisms. Before we get started, I would like just to introduce today's guest speakers. Just quickly, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn, Member of Parliament of the United Kingdom. Hope he will join us soon. Nadim Shihadi, researcher, economist, and academic. Dr. William Booth, Latin American history lecturer. And Dr. David Monnier, co-director of the UJCI and International Relations and Foreign Policy expert. Mrs. Alicia Cozzolieri, communications director at Partners for Palestine, Max Giller, spokesperson for Palestine Action, Adam Horowitz, managing editor of Moldovice, and finally, Naomi Barasa, Kenya social justice activist, Latin American history lecturer as well. Allow me to explain the presentation format quickly. Each speaker will have 4 to 5 minutes to present their testimony and insights. And after all speakers have finished their presentations, if it permits, we will have a discussion session lasting no more than 30 minutes. During this session, speakers can add their thoughts and comments on their speakers' contributions, and other speakers' contributions. And at the end of the webinar, each speaker will have 1 minute to provide their final words and conclusion messages. Let's start. Thank you very much for listening, and let's start our first guest speaker for today to give him the floor. And the first speaker today is Mr. Adam Horowitz. There, Adam. Adam Horowitz.
Yes, hi, thank you. I was
Yes,
just
hello. Go
unmuting
ahead.
myself. Thank you so
No,
much.
no,
Thank you so much for
go
having me
ahead.
today.
Thank
Um,
you.
so I was asked to speak briefly about the ongoing genocide in Gaza, especially in the context of the topics that we're going to be talking about today. And obviously, this is an enormous topic that we could use our entire session to discuss. So I guess I just have a few brief updates to start with, and I think later we'll be talking about how these really fit into these broader themes. I want to start by saying that, within the broader genocide that we've been seeing over this last 14 months in Gaza, that today itself we're entering the 70th day of the direct siege of North Gaza. This has been a wide-scale ethnic cleansing operation that has sought to expel the Palestinian population in Gaza, in the area north of Gaza City. This has involved not only attacks and the mass detention of civilians, but also the attacks on hospitals and the entire civilian infrastructure of Palestinian society in Gaza, as well as the prevention of medical, food, and humanitarian aid. Just last week, Amnesty International confirmed what the International Court of Justice had called plausible last year, but what has also been obvious to any fair-minded observer around the world over these last 14 months. Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. Now, the total numbers of what we've been seeing are overwhelming, and we don't have nearly enough time to discuss all of them. But as many of us will be familiar, it's been estimated at this point that well over 200,000 Palestinians have likely been killed in this genocide, although the exact number is not known. And in keeping with the theme of today's session, it's also worth noting that the genocide has featured many, many instances of mass detentions of Palestinians inside Gaza, although similarly, the exact numbers of Palestinians detained is not known. The only reported number that I've seen, or the most recent reported number I've seen, was about 3,000 Palestinians, and that was close to a year ago at this point. So we really don't know. But anecdotally, many of us have seen and heard the horror stories that have emerged from Israeli detention centers, or what can more aptly be described as concentration camps, of detainees being tortured and raped, to the point that this has become even a new story in Israeli society, where those Israeli forces and those rapists have become celebrities of sorts. But still, during this siege over the last 70 days, we've been seeing the photos and the reporting from North Gaza of the mass roundups of Palestinians throughout Gaza. One thing we've reported at Mondoweiss is about how Israeli forces have been using facial recognition software and AI as part of this effort to identify and create a database of Palestinians in Gaza that I'm sure will live on long after this genocide is thankfully over. And I guess I would just want to wrap up, and I think this is a theme that we'll be coming back to again and again today, is clearly the genocide that we've been seeing in Gaza as a singular event and a horrible, obviously a horrible event, but it is really part and parcel with Israel's overall plan to colonize and control all of historic Palestine, and really to erase Palestinian society and Palestinian life. There are currently debates in Israeli society in regards to the siege we're seeing in North Gaza of the call to directly recolonize or resettle northern Gaza. But the genocide that we're seeing should not be viewed outside of the context that we'll be discussing today, in the context of controlling and attacks on Palestinians and Palestinian life. So I think that's what I would like to start with in terms of my contribution to the conversation.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam, for your insightful contribution. And now we will move to give the floor to Mr. David Morier. Mr. David. Hello. Technical Director of the USCI. Mr. David, are you there?
You are muted, Dr. David, and also, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so I just felt confused
Yes.
that you might not be there, or I'm pronouncing the name wrongfully.
I'm here. Sorry. I
Okay,
was muted.
please. And okay, can everybody see the picture? I mean, landscape, or just me?
No, I guess the camera is upside down, Dr. David.
Okay. Oh, no, still
I can
the
see
other
it
side.
also. I can
Just
turn
can
my
you
head like
rotate it?
this.
Is it much better?
We have to do.
Sorry, I'm in
That's
Beijing, and
that's fine. Go ahead.
I'm in Beijing, and yeah, it's midnight here. Good evening. I think our colleague Adam has laid rather a very critical basis on what is happening in Palestine, in Gaza in particular, with regards to the treatment of prisoners. The bigger question for us is, why is it being allowed by the international community? We all know that next year is the celebration of the eighth year of the United Nations. And the bigger question is, what are the implications of this? What should the international community do? What it is failing to do? And what can the civil society and all of us, pro-human rights groups, can do to ensure that the genocide and treatment of prisoners in particular receives the kind of messaging that it deserves. So firstly, we have seen increasingly the division within the United Nations, that a number of countries in the developed world continue to play a very negative role with regards with what is Israel doing in Gaza. And one does not want to generalize that within the developed world, there are a number of progressive forces and many voices that are on this platform who are in these countries, who are protesting and disagree with the views of their own governments. However, the crimes that are being committed have a huge implication on the legitimacy of the international system that we all live in. What it means is that if this is allowed to continue much longer, the entire basis of the United Nations will collapse. Chances are quite high that within the global south, the view of human rights, the views, double standard that is played, selective morality, where we see what's happening currently in Syria and how it is covered by major channels in the developed world, and the manner in which they cover what's happening in Israel or in Ukraine, or lack of coverage at all in other parts of the developing world, particularly in Africa. And therefore, this has a huge implication on the very same system, like the League of Nations that collapsed before the Second World War. Chances are high that the UN system that we know will also collapse. Why? Because the norms and values that underpins the United Nations, the Human Rights the Declaration of Human Rights, and the foundation of the system itself, it's no longer working for the globe, for those in the developing world, and particularly in conflict zones, such as one in Palestine. And what should we do? I think the most important, I'm glad to hear about the usage of AI. We know that the Israeli government is also equally using AI for targeting individuals as people move. We've heard and read a lot about the software that they use in terms of targeting civilians, in deciding who is a so-called terrorist and who is not. And I think it is important that these crimes are documented and find ways for the limited information that we're getting to ensure that those who are committing these crimes at some point are held accountable. I think that it is critical, important. And we also need to have the records, as we all know, with other genocides during the Second World War of Jewish people, and genocides that continue post Second World War in Europe, in Africa, in Rwanda. The keeping of records is quite important, so that we have a source and records to go to should we either persecute or to stand as evidence that we in the international community can use. And also a need to learn from what happened in other conflicts, as was what was happening in my own country, South Africa, during the anti-apartheid struggle. There were a lot of solidarity coming from the international community, assisting those in prison and families of prisoners. And I think there is a need to encourage that and resources to be made available, to be done in a transparent way to avoid Israel's government tendency of weaponizing the very same solidarity coming from the international community. I think we've seen in the past months that any efforts by any grouping, human rights groups, either they're bombed, killed, assassinated, or weaponize the entire process of assisting people on the ground. And therefore, I think it is important for us to keep our eyes on the ground, record as much as we can, use technology, and far beyond that, mobilize communities across the world with hard evidence on what is happening inside Gaza as well as West Bank. And beyond that, I think we've seen a rampage bombardment in Lebanon, and we've seen it going beyond Lebanon. In Syria, as we speak, random bombing, and no one is saying anything. And civilians are being killed in these bombardments. And I think it's high time that the international community should take a stand. I'll stop here for now. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David, very much for your contribution. And think just because we are a bit, some speakers should leave in some minutes. So we'll take now Mr. Nadim Shehadi, researcher, economist, and academic, because he has to leave at something like 8:30. So go ahead, Nadim.
Hello, hi. Thank you for inviting me. Can you hear
Thank
me
you.
clearly? Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you. Go
Yes.
ahead.
First, I have to apologize. When I received the invitation, I answered that I would be very interested to attend the seminar and learn from it, rather than me having a specific contribution on prisoners in Israel. But I will give you my perspective just for the discussion. First of all, I think, especially today and this week, we cannot see things in isolation, like, Gaza, Syria, Lebanon, even the broader region is in a way at a crossroad. And we in Lebanon, I'm from Lebanon, and we in Lebanon were watching what was happening in Gaza with great concern, thinking that our turn will come next. And our dilemma was whether our turn, whether we should.
100%, I agree with you.
Yes, but our dilemma was whether to blame Israel or Hamas and Hezbollah at the same time. I mean, this is the objective of the operation in October 7 was to provoke the genocide that happened later, and Hezbollah joined also in support in order to broaden the fighting according to a regional agenda, which neither we nor the Palestinians were consulted on, and we were the victims of both Israelis and Iranian proxies, if you like, who are in control of our region. So this
Sorry,
could be
sorry,
Yeah.
Mr. Shehadi. I want to confirm that you said that the target of the 7th of October is to provoke the genocide. By who?
by
Who-
Israel.
I mean, to provoke Israel. No. Who wants to provoke Israel?
This is okay. So I've written about this. It's a very classic guerrilla tactic, and it's in in the books of Mao Zedong and Che Guevara and Ho Chi Minh and all that. Basically, the guerrilla infiltrates the population, hits at the state, and the state reacts violently against the civilians, and it causes an uprising against the state. This is very classic guerrilla tactic, guerrilla strategy. It's called the strategy of provocation. It works, unfortunately. It works, and it works every time. And but I think the broader question here is whether we agree with the agenda or whether we are looking for a future of peace in the region. This is the division that we are seeing. That I think we should. This is my perspective, at least. Whether I mean, the Palestinian Liberation Organization gave up on violence and joined the peace process. And we are in a new phase, which I think would benefit the whole region. But there is the anti-peace process. I'm not saying that whether they're right or wrong. They may be right, but this is their perspective, that they are against the Oslo Agreement, which they see as a surrender and capitulation and giving up on fundamental rights, all of that, and that violence is the only way, armed resistance is the only way. So here is where I will come to the prisoners.
Let's focus more on
let me include
aspects.
the prisoners, and then we can discuss. So where the prisoners come in is precisely that Israel has not given up one single prisoner with negotiations. The Israelis were too clever for their own good, and the negotiations were a failure for the PLO, and the PLO was discredited because of this failure. Whereas Hamas and Hezbollah, by taking hostages and capturing soldiers, managed to release hundreds of prisoners. So I think that's where the prisoner issue comes in, and
Okay, sorry, Naeem, I have to interrupt here because
yes,
I think we have deviated a bit
we
from
have.
the theme of our discussion today. So now we have
Yes, I'm sorry, I missed the first
and
few
situation
minutes.
on the ground. So let's discuss this situation and violations against Palestinian prisoners and the situation now. How can we face it, and how can we solve this dilemma which is happening now
I
in
think
Gaza by the Israelis?
I think I agree with your previous speaker that the world should not tolerate such behavior from Israel, and that the carte blanche that Israel has to destroy the region is basically what makes it believe that it can. So I very much agree that there has to be pressure to stop this, and I think it's for Israel's own good, because Israel, I think, is committing suicide by thinking that by destroying the region it can have security. It is
Thank you very
only
much.
peace that will give it security, and
Thank
peace
you.
by negotiations, not by destruction of the
Thank
country.
you very much, Nadeem
And I want
Shahari,
to introduce here also what
Okay.
happened in Syria the last few days, which we
Oh,
cannot
okay,
ignore.
briefly.
No, just keep it in mind that
Okay.
we've been seeing horrific footage of the prisons in Syria, and I think the whole region has a prison problem where people are taken hostage by states. And it is definitely, as your previous speaker, David, said, a human rights issue that should not be allowed or tolerated internationally. And it would be a failure of the UN as we know it.
Awesome.
Thank you
Okay,
very
thank
much.
you very much, Raif, for your contribution. And
You're
now
welcome.
we move to Mr. Max Geller, spokesperson of Palestine Action. Max, are you there?
I'm here, yes.
Okay, Max,
I just want to say
please.
that was a tough act to follow.
Why?
Never mind. We're in a very difficult situation.
Palestine act to follow. Okay, sorry for that.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Go
I
ahead.
just start off by introducing your audience who might not be familiar with the work Palestine Action is doing. We have been around for 4 years. During that time, we have engaged in a relentless campaign of direct action against Elbit weapons facilities which operate here in the UK. When we began our campaign 4 years ago, there were 10 Elbit weapons facilities operating in the UK. And through a series of unrelenting direct action campaigns, we have forced the closure permanently of 3 of those facilities. Since the genocide has begun in October, we have stepped up our campaign, as you can imagine. I think it's fair to say to everyone here that activism will never be the same again after these last 14 months of genocide. We are seeing people take upon themselves what our government should have been doing long ago. We are seeing people enact a people's weapons embargo. People are taking drastic measures into their own hands, and we are seeing the state repress them with drastic measures of their own. Right now, as we speak, there are 23 people who are currently incarcerated in British jails for trying to stop this genocide with their own hands. They are the moral compass of a nation. They are the most brave and noble people amongst us, and they are sitting in jail at the behest of a foreign apartheid state. We are living in a situation in which 70% of the people support an unequivocal arms embargo against Israel, and yet the arms parts for the F-35 jet, which just last night committed a horrific massacre in northern Gaza, we see these arms licenses continue. And so it's the arms embargo falls to us. And what was really heartening and beautiful to see is that members of Palestine Action who took drastic action and smashed up an Israeli weapons factory were found not guilty by a jury of their peers a few months ago. And in response, the state has begun to use its most repressive tactics yet, its terrorism laws, to hold our activists indefinitely. Because if they can't get convictions in courtrooms, they are now attempting to stop our movement by using the Terrorism Act. The treatment of our prisoners, of course, does not compare to the plight of Palestinian prisoners, which obviously cannot be overstated. But I will leave you with one last anecdote, which is that the Palestinian youth movement has published a novel called The Trinity of Fundamentals, which they have smuggled, which is a beautiful, beautiful book that was written by Palestinian prisoners and smuggled out of Israeli jails. That book is now in the arms of 23 British prisoners who are being held in British jails for trying to stop this genocide. The movement between Palestinian prisoners and Palestine Action prisoners, the links are organic, and it should be on the forefront of everyone who is doing this work to keep prisoners, whether they're in the UK or in Palestine, at the forefront. It is one of the main pillars of the resistance movement, and it is there for a reason. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much, Max. And now we have Mr. Jeremy Corbyn, Member of Parliament of the United Kingdom. So I want to be excused by everybody else because maybe he's short of time, so he has to come in, and afterwards we can take the normal order. Mr. Corbyn, are you there?
Yes. Yes.
Hello, Mr. Corbyn. So yeah, thank you very much for joining us, and please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I'm sorry just to drop into the meeting like this. We're in the midst of a lot of voting and activity in the British Parliament. The situation for the Palestinian people in general has always been bad all of my life. And I was born in 1949 under occupation, and many forced into exile, and tens of thousands in refugee camps. The occupation of the West Bank by Israeli forces ever since 1967 has got worse. The settlement policy has got worse. Gaza under siege for decades and now under complete occupation, and an attempt by Israel to settle it and move more Israelis back into Gaza is absolutely shocking. 45,000 people known to have died, possibly 100,000 more bodies going to be found under the rubble. This is the most disgraceful piece of carnage I can imagine in the world. And I feel this constant sense of anger and frustration as we watch in live television lives being lost in Gaza. The only thing that one can say by way of solace on this is that there are millions of people around the world who are desperate to see peace, desperate to support the Palestinian people, and desperate to turn out on marches and demonstrations, and above all, to provide aid. I've lost count of the number of events I've been to or been organized in my area and others, just trying to get aid to the people, the Palestinian people in Gaza. But the Palestinian people should not have to rely on UNRWA, should not have to rely on aid, should not have to rely on charitable donations. They should be able to live in peace so they can grow their food, so they can manufacture their goods, so they can teach their children, and they can care for them in hospitals. So it is about empowerment of the Palestinian people. The other thing that has come out of particularly the last year, has been something quite amazing. And that has been a growing sense of understanding of the history of the Palestinian people, and also of the culture, the music, the poetry, the art, the song, and the traditions of the Palestinian people. And it's that I think we can hold on to. I produced with a number of other people, including Len McCluskey, the former Unite leader, and others, a book of poetry called Poetry for the Many. And we have read many poems, but the one that always goes strongest to all the events that I've done is Mahmoud Darwish poem on Jerusalem. And I read that out very carefully and very slowly, and then encourage the audience to discuss the issue of Palestine and why they've got to show solidarity with it. And so that is what we've all got to do all the time. Keep on keeping on about Palestine and stopping the disgraceful supply of weapons from Britain, from the USA, and from many other countries, which are the crucial parts for the F-35 jets that have killed so many people in Gaza and are now killing people in Lebanon and in Syria. We have to stand with the people of Palestine. That is what I'm doing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Corbyn. And just I have one question for you. Since we are one of our topics today and key points is the global responsibility and inaction. The role of the international community, we know, of course, that now is insufficient to help the people in Gaza. If I may say insufficient, maybe it's less than insufficient, but being pessimistic or optimistic, I mean, the UK Parliament, is there a kind of feel that they are going to do something or in the future to try to stop this war, or the situation will be like this, no progress, no words against Israel?
Very slowly, attitudes have begun to change, and that started when there was a maneuver in Parliament to prevent there being a vote on a ceasefire. That would be more than a year ago. And a number of us were very, very angry about that. And then there were demonstrations outside MPs' offices. There were marches in all of their towns and cities all over the country. And there was then a distinct change of language in Parliament. And then in the election, which was called last July, which was a surprise to many people that it was held in July. Many were expecting it to be later in the year, probably November or December, but it was in July. The Labour vote went down. It was even lower than 2019 and much, much lower than 2017. And 5 of us were elected as independents, quite specifically saying we were standing for a ceasefire and with the Palestinian people. And we formed an independent alliance group in Parliament, and we worked very closely with other MPs, some Labour, some Plaid Cymru, some SNP, and some Green Party, or all of the Green Party MPs, on continually raising issues. And so there is a change, but it's very, very slow. The government reluctantly agreed to suspend a small number of arms licenses supplied to Israel. We've strongly criticized that. It's not enough, because as long as we've supplied the crucial parts for the F-35 jets, then we are part of the problem. And so we are continuing with that. And our next big demonstration is going to be in January, when we'll fill the streets of London again. But we've not given up on this. And I'm doing events this weekend in Manchester and other places where I'm promoting a book we've written called The Monstrous Angle of the Guns, which explains the role of the arms industry and arms trade in both supplying Israel, but also encouraging Israel to become a major weapons manufacturer. The people that come to those events are very interested to discuss this and take action on it. And so, yes, things are changing far too slowly, but we are making headway in the sense of public opinion is with us.
Mr. Corbyn, one last question about the
Sure.
ICJ arrest warrants. Just checking if the British Parliament is intending to try to activate these arrest warrants to really bring or call to bring Netanyahu and Gallant to justice. And especially, what's going on now is really confirming the righteousness of these arrest warrants.
As you know as well as I do, there have been a number of legal judgments against Israel on the Fourth Geneva Convention, on the UN Security Council, and the General Assembly, not just in the past year, but over many, many years. The crucial events in the past year have been the International Court of Justice determination of acts of genocide by Israel against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Indeed, I went to the hearing in The Hague as an observer with the South African delegation, and all credit to South Africa for what it did. The ICC hearing, the International Criminal Court hearing, eventually issued arrest warrants. We then demanded in the British Parliament that the British government and the British judicial system adhere to those arrest warrants. Initially, the response of the government was this would be up for consideration at the time. We pointed out that the ICC treaty, the Rome Statute, does not give any leeway to any government on this. They are required to carry out the arrest warrants, whether they agree with them or not. There is no room for maneuver. It is a legal requirement. It's just as much as if it were in domestic law. We then raised it several times by special questions in the House of Commons, and eventually got an undertaking from the government that they would abide by the ICC arrest warrants. Now, Netanyahu or anybody else haven't shown up in Britain as yet, and I very much doubt they will. But the headline decision we were given by the government was that they would abide by it. We pressed very hard to make sure that happened, and should any of those people who are subject to ICC arrest warrants arrive in Britain, all of us in Parliament, and indeed tens of thousands of people around the country, would be absolutely on the case, demanding those arrest warrants be carried out.
I course, I know that your time is pressure, and just in 1 minute, you think that Smotrich and Ben-Gvir can also be included in these warrants or this decrees, or it's something different?
What do you mean? Sorry, I didn't quite get the question.
Ben-Gvir and Smotrich as well. We are talking about their kind of incitement to genocide in Gaza. Could they be included in this?
I think that two things come from that are very important. Yes, I do think the issue not just of the individuals named, but of those that are participating in it in any form, or should also, in my view, be subject to the same charges. But also, you're quite correct, the issue of incitement, which then, of course, takes you into the realms of political campaigning and, of course, the role of the media in this. And I think that is very important. The point I made at the last rally we held, 10 days ago in London, was this, that the long arm of international law extends to those that participate in undermining international law. Since the ICJ has given its very strong opinion about acts of genocide by Israel, and the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against named individuals, including Benjamin Netanyahu, then in my view, and I suspect, and I'm not a lawyer, but I suspect there are many legal opinions that would agree with me, would say that the supply of weapons knowingly supplied to people they know have been found to be in need of arrest warrants over genocide, then becomes complicit in those acts of genocide. And so I find it unbelievable that we are still supplying weapons to Israel, knowing full well that its prime minister is not only arraigned before courts within Israel on charges of corruption, but he is also arraigned before 140 countries around the world on an arrest warrant for the ICC. So what on earth are we doing supplying weapons to Israel, and in particular to Netanyahu?
The British Parliament cannot apply this kind of warrants, or not this kind of, their own warrants, their own sanctions upon these two ministers as a procedure by the Parliament itself.
We can and do demand of ministers that they adhere to the decisions of the International Criminal Court, and they've said they do. What we haven't succeeded in doing is getting them to accept the ICJ decision on acts of genocide, and that is what we're working on at the moment.
Thank you much, Mr. Corbyn, for your precious time and for your contribution. Thank you very much for being with us.
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me onto this program today. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I think we'll go back to our order before, and we will give the floor to Alicia Ottosolieri, and I hope she can just correct my pronunciation of her surname. Alicia, are you there?
Yes, thank you. It's Alicia Cuchulieris, and thank you for the invitation to join you today.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I think it's very important that, and we appreciate the report that came out last week from Amnesty International calling what's happening a genocide. But I think it's very important to note that the events of October 7th, that was not the beginning of something, that was the reaction to something. If we look at the events and things that have been happening prior to that, I think we can easily say that Israel has been implementing a very slow genocide to the Palestinians, both in the occupied West Bank and in the Gaza Strip. In the Gaza Strip there, the Palestinians, it's 2.2 million civilians that are living in one of the most densely populated places on the planet, and everything going in and out of the region and that part of the the region is dictated by the Israeli government. That includes access to food, clean and safe water, medical equipment, and also construction equipment. A lot of people may not realize that this is not the first conflict that has taken place in the Gaza Strip since they have been under the blockade in the past 17 years. So the ability to rebuild has been stifled as well. Amnesty also reported in their apartheid report in 2022 that Israel was using mathematical calculations to dictate how many calories an individual needs to live or to survive. Not to live and thrive, but just to survive. And based on the population, that's the amount of food aid that was allowed into Gaza. So them using a form of almost starvation is not new. It's not anything unique since the past 14 years. Also in the occupied West Bank, where things are a little bit more there's a little bit more freedoms. It's a military occupation, which that's supposed to be a temporary military strategy, but the occupation has been in place since 1967. So that's, several decades where everything that every part of Palestinians' life is dictated by these military orders. They say it's in the form of security, which something like maybe traveling and protests, we can probably see that there's justification for security reasons with that, but there's military orders that dictate what you can and cannot produce on your own land. So whether it's roses or hydrangeas, tomatoes or cucumbers, I don't see where that is any type of security risk, but that is how the Israeli government operates with the Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. And again, this is not anything new. It's not happening in the past 14 months. This is decades where this has been happening. And the sad thing is that the United States has been funding this, and it's not just funding the genocide now, but it's been funding the state of Israel for decades. They send the tune of $3.8 billion in aid. The vast majority of that is in the form of military aid, and they've been doing that for decades. So they're getting resources from one of the strongest countries in the world. They have the most sophisticated weapons in the world, and they've been getting that for years, but yet they still don't have their house in order. They still don't have peace in their region. So clearly whatever they have been doing in the past is not working. And what the United States does in response to that is rewards them with extra with additional aid and more weapons. I think it's a great thing that the United States is able to step in times of need, whether it be a natural disaster or times of conflict, to send aid into places where these things are happening is great. But the fact that right now and for the past 14 months, we've essentially been supplying the state of Israel weapons and aid, basically with a blank check to commit genocide is just it's horrific. It's shameful. And we were as Americans, we were hoping that with Vice President Harris stepping in to run for president, honestly, a lot of us thought that she just had one job, just to say that she was, we can be an ally of Israel, but we need to hold them accountable if they are committing war crimes and violating international humanitarian law. So basically, that's all she needed to do to get support, is to say that we're going to hold Israel accountable and punish them if they are breaking the law, which we should be doing with any other country. And she didn't do that. So she lost the election for herself, for the Democrats, and for the vast majority of Americans who are not looking to have another Trump presidency, because we don't think that they're going to support the needs of the people here in the United States or the Palestinians abroad.
Okay, so I mean, having cleared the situation now on a kind of human rights point of view, but let's make it more legal, and we check that the development of these arrest warrants, the developments of what's going on in the international arena in terms of legal procedures. Do you think that this kind of developments is going to continue, or is going to fade away by time?
It's tricky to say, because if you look on the like on a global scale, you see other nations supporting the decisions of the International Criminal Court, the United Nations, but the United States seems to still want to give a pass to the Israeli government. For instance, with the settlements in the occupied West Bank, by humanitarian international humanitarian law, those are all illegal. But nobody's holding Israel accountable for that. So any of these settlements that are now in place in the occupied West Bank, all of those people that are living there in the settlements, they're all there illegally, but nobody has stepped up to hold Israel accountable for that. Whereas the United States would take lead on something like that, I think that there would be room for change, because I think the vast majority of nations don't support what Israel is doing, and they do see that that there is now a genocide happening. There is an apartheid state that has been in place. But as long as the United States wants to be, policing everybody and taking charge of what's happening, as long as they continue to support Israel, it's going to be tricky for anything to be implemented, which is unfortunate.
I see. Thank you very much, Alicia, for your contribution.
Yes, of
And
course.
thank you very much for being with us. And now we'll move to Dr. William Booth, Latin American history lecturer. Dr. William, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Good. Excuse me. And apologies, I missed the very beginning, and I have to dash off after this to another meeting. What I'd just like to say on the issue of prisoners, and this picks up a point that Nadeem raised earlier, is I think those images of Syrian prisoners being released in the last few days have really brought home the difference in reaction we see to different populations and their treatment in the wider world. And Alicia is absolutely right that the global majority are standing solidly on the side of Palestinians and calling out Israeli atrocities and so on. But the issue of what counts as a human right, or more specifically, who is entitled to human rights, is very clearly divided in the world, and there is a different set of rules for those who are in the favor of the global Northwest and those who aren't. And as a Latin American historian, I'm very aware of this, of what the United States is willing to look the other way on, or to encourage in the 1970s in Chile and Argentina. In Argentina, very much with Israel's support, of course, despite the extremely anti-Semitic nature of the dictatorship. So that's one point. And then something that Jeremy mentioned, which I think is also very important, is it's not just about bombs and airplanes and howitzers, right? It's about the technology of imprisonment, of surveillance, of repression. And so the BDS movement that I'm part of at UCL, which is growing very fast, we now have 800 people, more than 850 people actually employed at UCL, who have signed the BDS pledge to say that we want UCL to divest and to boycott Israeli companies and institutions. One of those companies that UCL is investing in is Cisco Systems. And Cisco provides a lot of the technology for identifying people who are then arrested, and also the technology for incarceration. So although we are looking at some of the more obvious candidates like Rolls-Royce, Airbus, BAE Systems, and so on, who are manufacturing weapons of war, technology manufacturers are really important too. Google DeepMind is heavily involved in this as well. So we can't tell our parliament does not particularly care about popular opinion. It's ignoring British popular opinion, which is very much in favor of stopping Israel's aggression and genocide. But what we can do is concentrate on workplace organizing, pushing our employers to divest at a local level and to recognize that what they describe as neutral tools are in fact tools and technologies that are being used to perpetuate human rights abuses, to perpetuate genocide. And so our initial response when we pointed this out to our management was, well, you know, if somebody manufactures something, it's not for us to say whether it's going to be used for good or evil purposes. And I think you could probably make that argument more easily for computing systems than you can for F-35 parts or howitzers. But even so, we have the evidence in front of us that these computer systems are being used in a way that causes strict and horrific repression of so many people, particularly in Gaza, but also in the West Bank and in Israeli territory itself. And I think just zooming out, and as David pointed out earlier, the international solidarity sphere is incredibly important. Again, with my Latin American history experience, that was crucial for so many occasions in Latin America in the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. It was crucial for South Africa, as he pointed out. And it's really important that those of us outside of the region who have any push on the levers of power at a local level, at workplace level, or like Jeremy in Parliament, that we keep on pushing, because the global majority is set against what is going on. They know it's wrong. It's obviously wrong. There is so much evidence now to show what's going on. And we cannot let a few governments of the global Northwest allow this genocide to continue. So just to assure people that we're keeping an eye on what's going on, we're well aware of it, and we're trying to do what we can where we can to help.
Dr. William, so I mean, since you mentioned about Mr. Corbyn said about the British Parliament, do you agree with him that there's a little the British Parliament can do to help this Palestinian cause or what's happening in Gaza?
I mean, the British Parliament could do a lot. You know, Britain, despite its declining global status, is still a very powerful country diplomatically. And if it chose to take a stand on these issues, it could be a very powerful voice. I can't see that happening under the current government. This is a government that the leadership of the current government booted Mr. Corbyn out of the party, basically for being so forthright on issues of international human rights and various other aspects of his politics. But nevertheless, there's going to be an election in a few years' time, and people are not going to forget who was signing off on human rights abuses, who was signing off on arms sales, who was denying genocide. And it will be a very important issue at the next election, I'm sure.
Hopefully. Thank you very much, Dr. William, for your contribution.
Thank you for the invitation.
You're welcome. And now we move to Naomi Barasa, Kenyan social justice activist, Latin American history lecturer at UCL as well. Naomi, are you there?
Yes, I am.
Hello, Naomi. So, okay, hello.
Hi, thank you so much for
Yeah,
inviting me to this forum. Maybe to just correct, I'm not a lecturer on Latin America history, so there's an error there.
Okay, so can you just correct this for us?
Yeah, I am a Kenyan social justice, the chairperson
Activist.
for Kenya, the chairperson for Kenya Palestine Solidarity Movement.
Okay, maybe it's my mistake. So I apologize, and please go ahead.
No problem, no problem. Yeah, so thank you so much for inviting me to this space, and just to basically focus on the questions for today. On the theme for today. I want to say that the Israeli government is practicing widespread torture and ill treatment, degrading treatment, and cruel treatment, which are all outlawed by international law. And what we see the inmates in Palestinian jails and under the Israeli military is all outlawed by the international law. We also see a huge rise on administrative detentions for Palestinian people. They are processed through as security inmates, which really does not require them to be charged, and it can be endless, it can be indefinite, and it can even be renewed indefinitely, which again falls below in the international human rights threshold. They have been applying unlawful combatant laws, which again are against international human rights law. So the tactics they are using of humiliation, stripping, searching, mocking the inmates, denying them access to their lawyers, denying them access to visits by their families, the overcrowding of the cells, imposing cruel collective punishments of denying electricity, denying them cutting water, all these things, denying prisoners outdoor exercises, they all amount to cruel and inhuman, degrading treatment, which is against international law. So besides the direct genocide, besides the ethnic cleansing that we are witnessing through bombing and everything, this is, I would say, it pokes holes a lot on the international law, on the sanctity of the international law, on the sanctity of human rights mechanism, but also the legitimacy and credibility of the mechanisms, but also looking at how the media, the mainstream media, is reporting all this almost to sanction, because this seems to be okay when it comes to Palestinians, then there's clearly a problem, and it is all against international human rights law. So it's important to note that this is part of a broader strategy for genocide, ethnic cleansing, and colonization. And this needs to be condemned in the strongest way possible globally, because it is very dangerous, and it poses a huge threat to everyone in the world. Because if this passes, then human rights law, international human rights law, will lose meaning, and it will therefore mean anyone, any nation, any state can apply the same to their people in country. So this, while it appears as a Palestinian problem at the moment, is a very dangerous precedent being set globally. It will catch up with us if this does not get stopped. So there is basically need for very continuous global pressure, number one, for Netanyahu and all the others indicted to be arrested. But also it is there's need for the world. We've been pushing for Netanyahu and Israel to be held accountable. There's one thing we need to do that we are not doing right. There's one thing that we need to do, which is taking a bold step to also push for the indictment of America, the indictment of Britain, and any other country that is sending weapons, that is financing the genocide, because they are not on their own. They cannot succeed on their own. And I also want to say, while we are looking at the situation of the Palestinian prisoners, it's important to recognize that the whole of Palestine, and particularly Gaza, is a prison, and everyone in Gaza Strip is a prisoner, just that they are in open prisons. And the same tactics, the same strategies that are being applied in those cells in the prisons are being utilized on, are being used in Gaza, targeting hospitals, targeting children, targeting women, denying access to water, food, electricity, and the general military operation in Gaza Strip. For me, it makes Gaza an prison, an open prison, and very, very similar corroborating strategies and tactics used in the prisons are being used in Gaza. So I'd like to say that the world seems helpless. The international community seems helpless, but it is very urgent that we organize in a way that the international community will be meaningful. Otherwise, it will just be the end. It will start the end of this so-called UN, so-called International Court of Justice, ICC, and the many, many international human rights treaties that we have. It is very urgent because what is happening to Palestine might just seal the deal for the death of all these institutions and mechanisms and treaties. Thank you.
Thank you, Naomi, for this information as well about the situation of prisoners and human rights in Gaza. And let me just add one thing here, if I may, that what's happening in Gaza is just an kind of not guerrilla action, but actually it's a resistance of the occupier. And this is so different from some guerrilla actions inside the same country, from the same people. This is something different from the resistance of the people for the liberation of their own country. So that's completely two different things.
I totally
very
agree
much.
with you. I totally agree with you, and I totally agree with Alicia. I am very happy that Amnesty International produced this report. I worked for Amnesty International for 27 years here in Kenya, but I am a bit disappointed, just as Alicia pointed out. Amnesty International, the advisory opinion of the ICJ, seemed to begin this whole issue from October 7th. This thing began over 100 years ago, and looking at the problem from October 7th makes you miss a critical point of oppressor and the oppressed. And it gives Israel the illegitimate right to defense. Israel has no right to defense. You cannot self-defend if you are an oppressor, if you are a colonizer, while the Palestinians have the right to self-determination. So the narrative is crafted in a way that seems to favor Israel all the time, even when it's international human rights organization, when it is International Court of Justice, when it is the media and everybody. So we need to be very, very categorical, even in the narrative shaping, because this is a colonized society. They are fighting for self-determination from
And as you said, it's an open prison. Yeah, that's right. Thank you very much, Naomi, for really giving us a nice picture of what's happening and trying to confirm some common sense, which sometimes people for my time try to forget. And now, since all our speakers have already spoken, so I'm asking if one of our guest speakers wants to comment for one last minute before we end this discussion. If there's somebody who wants to have more, I think Mr. Nadim Shahari is waving there. So, Mr. Nadim, go ahead.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
I totally agree with the Naomi that there is a huge problem of narrative. There is a Palestinian Hamas narrative, which has, in a way, now become hegemonic on the Palestinian side. It has the majority of Palestinian support, the Hamas narrative. We have to recognize this. And there is the Israeli narrative, which is the Netanyahu and the right-wing narrative, which is also becoming hegemonic in Israel. And these two narratives are out justify sort of mutual destruction by both. So both narratives want to destroy each other. And I think that outsiders, especially outsiders who have a stake in the matter, who are from the region, who are suffering the consequences, should step in with an alternative, and to encourage the other side in both contexts. I think that both narratives are very strong, but there is definitely an alternative to the settler colonial narrative and to the Israeli insecurity based on traumas of Holocaust and all that, and that would be I think that approaching it in a way like in a pathological way, treating it as a pathology would be useful, because you have two populations who are out to destroy each other based on narratives of grievances from the past, and they both justify it.
So they think that both parties are the same.
I do not make an equivalence, but I think that if you listen to the Israeli right, they are.
I don't have to listen. I mean, you have to have your own narrative, and what
Yes.
your own narrative cannot have two sides. Just have one side, the truth, and the truth
Sure.
is
okay. My narrative, if you like, as someone from the region who wants to live in peace, and who wants peace for both the Palestinians and the Israelis. My narrative is that you have two deeply traumatized populations with a memory of genocide on both sides, on the Israeli side and on the Palestinian side.
Actually, we are running.
Yes,
We already run out of time.
that was my.
Thank you very much. Thank you very
You're
much for joining us. And at the end of this valuable webinar, I would like to thank everyone who has taken
I
part in
wanted to say something before we finish. I'm sorry we are running out of time, but I feel
yeah, we have 30 seconds.
Yes, I want to say that that's a very dangerous thought, because if we start thinking that way, we will start thinking that the oppressor and the oppressed are using equal means to destroy each other. Yet the oppressor has all the machinery, and the oppressed is just trying to say, I need to be self-determined. So there's nothing like a history, history of I don't know, I've even forgotten the word. But here, it's a wrong narrative. Palestinians are just sticking to be self-determined. The Palestinians should determine what they want. The rest of us should just stay aside and let them decide if they want to use armed struggle to fight for their rights. That is what, because they have tried everything else, including that useless Oslo Accord that never worked. It didn't work for them. It worked for Israel. So I think at this point, we need to recognize that the Palestinians have the ultimate right to decide how they go it and how they will liberate their country and get their country back.
Thank you, Naomi, for your time. And I think that's the best words to wrap up this discussion. Yes. Thank you very much for your precious time and input. And thank you very much and goodbye.